courtroom was quieter than it should have been. In the stillness, Casey could hear the sound of her own heartbeat, heavy and fast in her chest, thumping against the dull roar of her thoughts. She barely noticed the echo of footsteps leaving, the shuffle of lawyers and witnesses heading out the door. No one cared to speak to her. No one was paying attention to the woman who had just lost everything, or had she? Casey Sinclair adjusted her coat, the hem of her sleeve catching on the edge of the chair as she stood. She'd never liked the way people treated her in this place. All polished marble floors and polished opinions. No one ever seemed to remember the truth. They never saw past the surface. Her ex-husband, Ethan, was standing by the door, his hand resting casually on the doorknob. She hadn't even realized he was still there, lingering in the background of this chapter of her life, one she thought she'd finally closed. "Gold digger," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear. The sneer in his voice made it worse. The fact that, after everything, he still saw her as nothing more than the woman who had married him for his money. As if she hadn't spent years of her life working just as hard as him, raising their son alone after his long hours at the office, managing the household while his idea of helping was to give her another gift card or take her out to dinner. Casey didn't flinch. She never did, not anymore. But inside, the words stung, not because they were true, because they weren't, but because he had said them so many times before, and she'd let him believe it. She'd spent years convincing herself it didn't matter. And yet, even now, as she faced the finality of their divorce, it cut through her, as sharp as the day they first married. "Didn't expect to see you here," Ethan continued, his voice tinged with mock sympathy. His suit was immaculate, the kind of designer label that cost more than Casey's rent in the apartment she'd had to move into. He looked good, still polished and perfect in the way only a man with privilege could. And yet, she couldn't help but notice the faint signs of wear around his eyes, the slight gray creeping into his temples, a softening around the jawline that hadn't been there when they first met. She used to find his confidence alluring. Now it was hollow. "I'm just here to sign the papers," she said flatly, picking up the pen from the table where the settlement had been laid out. It was final now. Everything they had worked for, built together, was being divided, pieces of their life neatly cut into portions. The house, the car, the savings, the assets. But Casey had no intention of leaving with just the scraps. Not this time. "Don't forget what you are," Ethan called after her as she made her way out of the courtroom. His voice followed her down the long hall, but Casey didn't look back. She didn't need to. Gold digger. The word still hung in the air like an insult that she wasn't sure would ever wash away. But what Ethan didn't know, what he'd never understood, was that she wasn't the one who'd been digging. He'd been the one who'd buried her in their marriage, deep into the pit of dependency and conformity. It had taken years, but she was starting to climb out. Casey stepped into the chilly breeze outside the courthouse and paused. The air had the bite of early winter, crisp and sharp, a reminder that things were about to change. As she reached for her phone, her thumb brushed against the cracked screen, a small crack that had appeared after she dropped it. Just another sign of the wear and tear that life had left on her. A message from her son, Jeremy, flashed on the screen. "Mom, are you okay?" The question was simple, but it hit her with a pang. Jeremy had always been the sensitive one, his empathy often sharper than her own. He'd seen her struggle, watched her fight to keep the family afloat while Ethan had grown further detached, buried in his work and his company. Jeremy had been the one to pick up the pieces, even as a teenager. She replied quickly, "I'm fine, baby. Just closing a chapter. How are you? Missing you, but I'm good. You don't have to do this alone, you know?" She smiled softly, as much as her heart hurt at the thought. Jeremy was right. She hadn't been alone all these years, not really. But the weight of it all had been hers to carry. Her disappointment, her guilt, the lingering feeling that maybe she wasn't enough for him, that somehow she'd failed at keeping their family together. But that was all changing now. She had no idea what was next, no concrete plan other than the simmering, growing fire inside her. There was power in this space, in this moment, the freedom she hadn't felt in years. And she wasn't going to waste it. Back at her apartment, she stood before the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. She didn't recognize herself at first. Her hair pulled back, tired eyes, the too tight blouse that used to fit her well. She had always been comfortable hiding in the background, taking the backseat to others. Ethan's career had always been the focus, his ambitions always the driving force. She had been content to stay in the shadows, to be the supporting role in the story of their life. But not anymore. Casey sighed and reached for the bottle of moisturizer. She dabbed it on her cheeks, smoothing the lines that had started to form over the years. Slowly, the woman in the mirror started to shift, stronger, clearer. A woman who had nothing to prove but everything to gain. She was done being the ex-wife, done with being underestimated. The gold digger label, stamped and sealed in her mind, was about to be rewritten. Casey had built this life for herself, silently and steadily, piece by piece. Her consulting business had been her quiet rebellion against a world that had always expected her to fade into the background. When she'd first started out, there had been whispers, just like there had been whispers when she had married Ethan. Back when people had said she was just looking for a meal ticket. But they didn't know her. They didn't know that, just like her mother before her, Casey could dig in her heels and survive. She had no interest in easy roads or handouts. All she wanted was a chance to prove her worth. And now, standing in the middle of her small apartment, Casey realized that the chance had finally arrived. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call. It was from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the answer button. It could be anyone. Another bill collector, another reminder of the financial strain she'd been juggling. But then a voice, sharp and familiar, cut through the silence. "Ms. Sinclair," the man on the other end said. "I'm calling about a startup we're looking to sell. I've been told you might be interested." The words hit her in a way she didn't expect. She paused, her heart thudding, before responding, "What kind of startup?" "It's a tech firm," the voice said, matter of fact. "We're struggling, and we need someone who can buy in and turn things around. You're the first person we've considered." Casey's mind raced. A tech startup. This wasn't just any opportunity. This was the chance she had been waiting for, her shot at more than just survival. "You're asking me to buy this startup?" she said, a grin tugging at the corner of her lips. "Cash in hand," the voice replied. She could almost hear him smile, but she wasn't sure whether it was because he knew something she didn't, or if it was because he had no idea who he was dealing with. "Well," she said, her tone cool and composed, "I think we can make a deal. Send me the details. I'll be in touch." As she hung up, Casey's fingers hovered over the screen. She looked back at the mirror, that quiet strength once again rising to the surface. "Gold digger," she muttered, almost laughing. "Just wait." If you feel a connection with this story, share your thoughts in the comments. Let's see how far quiet strength travels. The fluorescent lights hummed above, flickering ever so slightly as Casey sat in the sleek, modern office waiting area. It was early afternoon in Austin, Texas, and the city outside was bustling with the usual hustle of tech moguls, startups, and coffee shops with Wi-Fi that practically bled into the air. But here, inside this pristine building, the quiet was stifling. She glanced around at the glossy black and white photos of successful business people on the walls. The kind of photos that made you think everyone in the room must already have it made. The type who, Casey now realized, would never even give her a second glance if she weren't here for this interview. It had taken weeks of convincing herself to even show up. What could a woman like her, divorced, over 40, with a background in accounting and consulting, possibly offer this prestigious tech firm? What could she say in a room full of young, well-dressed professionals who had likely been trained in Ivy League schools, or at least who had already climbed higher than she could ever dream of? She straightened her posture, trying to push the unease from her mind. This wasn't just another interview. This was her chance to prove something bigger than herself. "Ms. Sinclair," the voice broke her out of her reverie. She looked up to see a woman in her early 30s, dressed in a sharply tailored navy suit, clipboard in hand. The woman's smile was polite but distant, as though this was just another interview in a day full of them. "Yes, that's me," Casey replied, standing up, her voice steady but laced with a quiet confidence she didn't feel. She walked into the interview room, taking a seat across from the two executives who were already waiting. One was a man, probably in his mid-30s, with short cropped hair and a crisp white shirt, and the other was a woman, her auburn hair pulled tightly into a ponytail, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us today," the man said, leaning forward slightly, his fingers steepled. "We've been looking through your resume, and we're interested to hear what you can bring to the table, Miss Sinclair." Casey nodded, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. "Thank you for the opportunity." She forced herself to make eye contact, telling herself she could do this. After all, she had built her consulting business from the ground up, and she had been doing this long enough to know that what they saw in her was only part of the equation. "I've worked in consulting for over 15 years, she began, choosing to focus on her experience rather than her self-doubt. "I've helped businesses restructure and reorganize, particularly in times of financial strain. I believe I could help your company in the same way." The man exchanged a brief glance with the woman sitting beside him. "Restructuring, you say? Could you elaborate on that a little? We're in a bit of a transition period, and we're looking for someone who can come in and lead our team through these growing pains." Casey paused, taking a breath before answering. "I believe the first step in any major restructuring is to evaluate the existing structure, find where things are breaking down, and then create a plan that helps rebuild it from the ground up. It's not always pretty, and it's not always easy, but the reward is in the long-term stability." She smiled faintly. "I've never backed away from hard work." The woman, who had been silent until now, looked at Casey with a raised eyebrow. "You're confident, I'll give you that. But tell me, why do you think this company needs you? The position we're hiring for is a director-level role. We need someone with a bit more modern experience." Casey felt the room temperature drop a few degrees. There it was again, the subtle question of whether she belonged. Was she too old for this, too slow to keep up with the fast-paced world they were in? Did they think she was just another consultant who wanted to pad her resume with a corporate job she didn't really need? She forced herself to stay calm. "I may not have grown up in the startup world, but I know business. The truth is, any company, big or small, needs someone who understands strategy and people. The technical side can be taught, but the ability to lead, to help a company face the challenges ahead, that's something you can't train into a person." The man smiled tightly, and the woman nodded slowly, but Casey could tell she wasn't convinced. She shifted her weight slightly, a knot forming in her stomach. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every answer she gave was met with skepticism or polite disinterest. She tried to steer the conversation back to the things she knew best: how to streamline operations, how to save a company that was faltering under the weight of its own ambition. But every suggestion seemed to be met with hesitation. When the interview finally ended, the woman stood up first, extending her hand in that detached, businesslike manner that said, "Thank you, but no thank you. We'll be in touch," she said. The man, too, stood up, but his words carried an undercurrent of finality. "We appreciate your time today, Miss Sinclair, but I'm afraid we're looking for someone with more recent experience in the tech industry." Casey took their hands firmly but didn't say anything. She knew exactly what this was. A polite way of saying she wasn't young enough, fast enough, or shiny enough to keep up with the company's needs. She wasn't the type they had in mind. She walked out of the building with a mix of frustration and resignation, but something else lingered too: determination. This wasn't the first time she had been told she wasn't good enough. It had started years ago, when she'd first walked into Ethan's world. His colleagues had looked at her with polite but dismissive glances. She was just a small-town girl who didn't understand the intricacies of their high-powered life, but it had kept her moving forward. It was the same today. She could feel the sting of their words, but it wasn't new. This time, it didn't break her. This time, it only fueled her. A few days later, as she sat at her desk, staring at the same resume she'd been perfecting for weeks, an email notification popped up. It was from the tech startup. Casey clicked it open. The words were brief. "Thank you for your time. Unfortunately, we've decided to move forward with another candidate." She let the email sit in front of her for a few seconds before deleting it. She didn't even bother to save it for later. That evening, as Casey walked to her car, her phone buzzed again. It was a text from Jeremy, her son. She smiled when she read the message. "How did the interview go?" She responded quickly, "It didn't work out. They went with someone else." There was a pause before his reply. "I don't get it, Mom. They're crazy. You've got what it takes." Casey didn't respond immediately. Her fingers hovered over the keys as the thought lingered in her mind. It had been a long time since she'd let herself believe that. "You've got what it takes." It was the kind of thing she'd told herself to get through the bad days. The hard days. The days when Ethan had called her a gold digger. The days when the world told her to keep quiet, stay small, and never aim higher. But something had changed. In the quiet space of this moment, Casey knew she was done waiting for permission. She started her car, the engine rumbling to life as she turned onto the road. There was one thing she could do, one thing that no one had seen coming. A small startup, just the right one, might be her ticket. The money was there, but it wasn't just the money that was motivating her. It was something deeper, something about proving to herself and to everyone who'd ever doubted her that Casey Sinclair was more than just an ex-wife or an aging woman. She was the force of quiet change, the kind that people overlooked, but the kind that could, when needed, reshape everything. Casey sat at her desk late into the night, the glow of her laptop screen casting a soft light across her face. The room was quiet, save for the occasional hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Austin's skyline outside her apartment window glittered faintly in the distance, but inside, the only light was from her screen and the distant light of a half-finished bottle of wine she hadn't bothered to pour herself a glass from. The paperwork for her latest consulting client sat untouched, gathering dust while she stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. It had been 3 days since the interview. The sting was still there, but it wasn't as sharp anymore. Instead, it had left behind something else, a quiet certainty. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. There was a deep hum in the back of her mind, something almost primal, an idea that had been taking root over the past few weeks. And now, sitting here in the stillness, it demanded her attention. She leaned forward, fingers poised over the keyboard, and began to type. A startup, one that's on the edge of failure, but salvageable with the right guidance. They need capital. They need leadership. I have both. She paused for a moment, reflecting on the small companies she had worked with in the past. How many times had she watched businesses teeter on the edge, held together only by the will of the people working behind the scenes? How many times had she seen big investors pull out at the last moment, leaving someone like her with nothing more than a mess to clean up? And then she thought of that phone call, the one that had come out of nowhere a few days ago, offering her a chance to buy into a startup. A tech firm, the voice had said, one with a future, but it needs someone who can make hard decisions. It had been the kind of call that made her heart race. Not because she was scared, but because it was the first real chance she'd had in years to prove to herself that she could rise above it all. The only question was, did she have what it took? Did she have enough to make something from nothing? She took a deep breath, her fingers moving again as if guided by instinct. A few $100,000 in liquid assets. I've been putting aside savings for years. That's enough for a first payment. And I know enough about startups, about everything, that I can make this work. I'm not afraid of failure anymore. I've been afraid of being stuck. But not anymore. She hit the send button on her email and sat back, feeling the weight of the moment. She had just sent a proposal to buy into the startup. The email was straightforward, detailing what she was willing to offer in terms of capital and what she expected in return. There was no long explanation, no pleasantries. Just a simple, business-like approach. Here's the money. Here's what I want. Let's make this work. As she closed her laptop and stood, her thoughts began to swirl. She couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement bubbling inside of her. It was the same feeling she'd had years ago when she first started her consulting business, when she didn't have a clue about how to make it work, but knew that she had to try. The next morning, Casey's phone rang before her alarm could even go off. She groaned, rolling over to grab it off the nightstand. It was the same number from the startup, the one that had reached out to her days ago. She sat up, heart racing a little faster this time. "Ms. Sinclair?" The voice on the other end asked, a bit hesitant. "Yes," Casey replied, her voice steady but with a touch of curiosity. "We've Revy. A good time to meet." 2 days later, Casey found herself sitting in a sleek office building downtown. The kind of building that screamed success, the kind of place she used to walk past and dream of entering one day. Now, she was sitting inside on the other side of the polished desk. The same man she had spoken to on the phone a few days ago, Ryan, was there, along with a woman named Julia, who introduced herself as the COO. "Casey," Ryan said, smiling warmly as he extended a hand. "We've been looking through your background and the plan you proposed. It's clear you've done your homework. And frankly, we're intrigued. You understand the business better than we expected." Casey shook his hand, a small smile on her face. "Thank you. I've been around long enough to know what works. This company has a lot of potential. It just needs someone who's willing to roll up their sleeves and get to work." Julia leaned forward. "That's exactly what we need. We've been on the edge for a while now, but the right leadership could push us over. The only thing standing in our way is funding, and that's where you come in." Casey nodded. "I have the capital to buy in. I've already got the initial funds ready." Ryan exchanged a glance with Julia. "Well, let's talk details." They spent the next hour hashing out specifics, how much Casey would invest, what she expected in return, and what her role in the company would look like. By the end of the meeting, Casey had a signed agreement, and the deal was set. She was now an official part owner of the company. As she walked out of the building, the weight of it hit her. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was in control. The next few weeks were a blur. Casey threw herself into the business. She met with the team, analyzed financial reports, and developed a plan to restructure the company. She could feel the skepticism from some of the employees, but there was a small, nagging feeling that kept tugging at her. Was this really what she wanted? Was this what she had been fighting for all along? The first week was tough. The tech world was fast-paced, and the startup had its own culture, one that Casey wasn't used to. The jargon, the meetings, the expectations, it all felt foreign to her at times. But each day, she grew more comfortable, more confident in her role. And with every small success, whether it was renegotiating a client contract or improving the company's cash flow, the confidence grew even more. It was late one night, after everyone had left for the day, that Casey sat in her office alone. She looked around at the space, her space now. The glow of the desk lamp was the only light, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. This was her new beginning. There was no more running, no more hiding in the background. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to Jeremy. "It's all coming together. I made the right choice." Jeremy's reply came a few minutes later. "I knew you would. You've always had it in you, Mom." Casey stared at the screen, a lump forming in her throat. She had always had it in her. It wasn't just the money or the company that mattered. It was the quiet strength she had discovered in herself. The kind of strength that couldn't be bought or sold. This wasn't just about proving Ethan wrong anymore. This was about showing herself that she was enough, that she was worthy, that no matter what anyone had said or thought about her, she was more than just a label. And it was just the beginning. The next morning, the phone call came again. This time, it was from the previous owners of the company, the ones who had been in charge before she bought the business. They wanted to talk to her about future opportunities. Casey knew this was coming. She could feel it in her gut. The early mornings were the hardest. The air was still cool, the city just beginning to wake up, and Casey was already at her desk, reviewing financial reports, preparing for the day's meetings. Despite the momentum she had built over the past few weeks, she still couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment, someone was going to walk through that door and tell her it wasn't enough. That she wasn't enough. She brushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. The company needed her. There were hundreds of small decisions to make each day, And while they didn't all feel monumental, every single one mattered. One wrong move, one missed opportunity, could send everything crashing down. The door to her office opened, and Ryan stepped in. He had a habit of doing that, popping in unannounced, always with a sense of urgency that reminded her of the tech world's fast pace. "Casey, we need to talk," he said, his voice more serious than usual. She glanced up from her screen, her fingers pausing mid-keystroke. "What's going on?" "We're having some issues with the development team. They're not responding well to the changes you've made," Ryan explained, his brow furrowed. "They're not exactly thrilled with the new direction." Casey nodded, her stomach tightening. She'd known it wouldn't be smooth sailing. Every time she'd taken on a new project in the past, there were always those who resisted change. But this felt different. "Are they not buying into the vision?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Ryan hesitated for a moment, then dropped the bomb. "No, they're pushing back harder than we thought. Some of them are talking about leaving. We could lose some key people if we don't handle this carefully." Her mind raced. Losing key people wasn't just a blow to the business. It was a hit to the reputation she was trying to build. It was a message that she, the outsider, the one they'd written off as just another gold digger, didn't belong here, that she couldn't lead. "You think I'm the problem?" she asked quietly, her tone barely above a whisper. Ryan shook his head, but his eyes betrayed him. "No, not exactly. But you're coming in with a different perspective than they're used to. You're breaking their routine. And for some of them, it's more than just a job. It's their identity. They don't want to change. And the last thing we need is a fractured team." Casey sat back in her chair, her mind whirring. Ryan's words stung, but they weren't entirely surprising. She had expected resistance. After all, she was an outsider, a woman in a room full of men, a newcomer in a field of seasoned professionals. And now, she was making waves in a company that had been operating one way for years. But the truth was, she wasn't the only one who had something to prove. This company needed her just as much as she needed it. They were stuck in a cycle of mediocrity, relying on old methods that weren't going to work anymore. The world had changed. If they didn't change with it, they'd be left behind. "I'll handle it," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "Set up a meeting with the team. I need to talk to them, face to face." Ryan looked at her, hesitant, but then nodded. "All right, I'll get it arranged for this afternoon." That afternoon, Casey stood at the front of the conference room, facing the group of developers, designers, and engineers who had been with the company since its inception. The tension in the room was palpable, each of them eyeing her with suspicion. They didn't know her, not really. She was still the outsider, the person who had bought the company out of nowhere. They had no reason to trust her, and maybe she hadn't given them a reason to yet. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice calm but carrying enough weight to be heard. "I know you're all frustrated. I know that change isn't easy, especially when it feels like everything you've worked for is being turned upside down," she began, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "But we have to be real with ourselves here. The way we've been doing things isn't working anymore. We're losing clients. We're losing momentum. And that's not just bad for business. It's bad for all of us." She could feel the resistance in the room. The unspoken, "Who is she to tell us how to run this company?" But she pressed on, pushing through the discomfort. "Some of you think I don't understand this business, or that I don't understand the pressure you're under. But you're wrong. I've been on the other side of this, working with companies just like ours. I've seen what happens when people are too afraid to change, when they cling to what they know because it's easier than facing the unknown." She paused for a moment, letting the silence hang between them. "I'm not here to be your enemy," she continued. "I'm here to make this company stronger, to help us all succeed. But in order to do that, we need to move forward together. I'm asking for your trust, not because I deserve it, but because I believe in what we're doing here. I believe in this team, and I believe that we can be better than we are." The room was quiet for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Casey could see the skepticism in their eyes, but there was something else there too, a flicker of something more. a realization that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as clueless as they had assumed. Finally, one of the developers, a man in his 30s named Mark, spoke up. "You're right. We've been stuck in the same loop for too long," he said, his voice hesitant but honest. "Maybe we've been holding on to what we know because we're scared, but we don't want to get left behind either." Casey nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I don't want you to get left behind either, but we have to push ourselves, all of us. It's going to be hard, and it's going to take time. But if we do this together, we can make something great." There was still some wariness in the room, but the tension had lessened. For the first time since she had walked in, Casey felt like she might actually be getting through to them. That night, as she sat alone in her office, Casey reflected on the day's meeting. She knew she hadn't won everyone over. Not yet. But for the first time, it felt like she was finally being seen for what she was. Not just the ex-wife, not just the outsider with money, but the woman who was ready to take on the challenge and make something of it. She glanced at the contract on her desk, the one she had signed just weeks ago, and for the first time it felt like her decision was paying off. She wasn't just the gold digger anymore. She wasn't just the woman who had married a successful man, only to be discarded when the time was right. She was her own person now. She had her own business, her own vision. She wasn't done yet, but she was getting closer. The next morning, Ryan came to her office with an unexpected update. "We've got a new client on board. They're interested in working with us, but they want to see proof that we're headed in the right direction," he said, his face lighting up. "This could be the break we need." Casey felt a flicker of excitement. She had known this was coming. Momentum, once it started, would be hard to stop. The challenge was keeping it going, maintaining the trust she'd started to build with the team, and proving to herself that she had made the right choice. "Well, then we get to work," she said, rising from her chair, already thinking through the next steps. The conference room was quiet, the kind of quiet that made Casey's thoughts echo louder than they should. The whiteboard behind her was filled with bullet points, projections, and key performance indicators. All of the things she had been studying obsessively for weeks. The walls, the glass tables, the polished floors of the office felt like they were closing in on her, but she held her ground. The air smelled faintly of freshly brewed coffee, and the hum of the air conditioning was the only sound to break the stillness. Her phone buzzed on the table in front of her, and she glanced at it without picking it up. It was another message from Jeremy. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I know you can do this." She smiled to herself. He was proud of her, but for the first time it didn't feel like enough. She needed to do this for herself. She needed to prove that she could stand on her own, that she could make this company thrive not just because she had the capital, but because she had the vision, because she had the drive. "Casey," Ryan's voice cut through her thoughts. He was standing at the door of the conference room, his face creased with a combination of excitement and nervousness. "We've got a deal." Casey stood, walking over to him, her heart picking up speed. A deal. She could feel the adrenaline surge through her, the weight of what this moment could mean. "Yes," he replied, holding up a folder. "I just got off the phone with one of our biggest potential clients. They've agreed to sign with us. They love the direction you're taking the company. They're ready to commit." She didn't say anything for a moment, letting the words sink in. A big client. This wasn't just any deal. This was the kind of breakthrough that could change everything. "That's fantastic," Casey finally said, her voice steady, but the excitement was just under the surface. Ryan handed her the folder, and she opened it to find the details of the contract. Her mind raced as she skimmed the terms. The numbers were big, the expectations were high, but she could see it. She could see how this deal could propel them forward, how it would establish the startup as a force to be reckoned with in the tech world. And then she saw the kicker, the clause that would require the company to meet aggressive growth targets within the next 6 months. Casey felt the room tilt for a moment. This was the kind of contract that pushed a company to its limits, testing its endurance. It was a good deal, but it was risky. "We'll need to move fast," Ryan said, his voice tense. "This is a huge opportunity, but the timeline is short. If we don't deliver, we could lose them just as quickly as we gained them. Casey took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had never been one to back down from a challenge. But this was different. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. "We can do this," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "We'll make it happen. No more second-guessing. Let's push the team. If we want to build something great, we have to move fast. We have to take risks." Ryan nodded, clearly relieved by her confidence. "All right, I'll get the team together. Let's get this deal signed, and then we can figure out the best way to deliver." The next few days were a blur of meetings, emails, and conference calls. The team worked around the clock, retooling the company's strategy to align with the client's needs. Casey barely slept, her mind constantly running through projections, logistics, and the countless tasks that needed to be handled. But the excitement was contagious. The team, once hesitant, was now fully on board, their energy matching hers. They had seen what she could do, and they were ready to follow her lead. But as the pressure mounted, Casey started to feel the weight of the responsibility more acutely. Every decision she made felt like it could tilt the balance one way or the other. One wrong move, one missed detail, and the entire company could be back at square one. She spent hours going over the numbers, refining the business model, and reviewing the client's needs. She knew they had a chance to make something truly great, but she also knew that she couldn't do it alone. A week later, the deal was finalized. The client signed the contract, and suddenly, everything changed. The startup was officially on the map, poised to expand in ways Casey had only dreamed of when she first took the plunge into this world. The momentum was real now. There was no turning back. Casey sat in her office, looking out at the skyline once again. The view had always been a reminder of how far she'd come. But today it was different. It wasn't just the view from her office anymore. It was the view from the top of something she had built. Something that had started from nothing but an idea, a little bit of money, and a whole lot of determination. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it was from her son. "I saw the news, Mom. This is huge. I'm so proud of you." She smiled, reading the message, but it wasn't just pride she felt. It was something deeper, the satisfaction of knowing that she had finally made it. The feeling that all those years of being underestimated, all the moments where she had felt small, had led her to this point. She typed back quickly, "It's not over yet, but we've come a long way." Later that day, as Casey stood in front of the team, ready to address the success of the deal, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The team had gathered in the conference room, some of them looking tired but elated. The mood was different now, energized, confident, ready for what was next. "All right, team," Casey said, stepping to the front of the room. "We did it. We landed the deal. But the real work starts now. This is just the beginning. We've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, and I need all of you with me. I'm counting on you." Her voice was firm, but there was an edge to it now, a quiet intensity that made the room fall silent. She could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her, but it wasn't a burden. It was a privilege. This company is ours to shape. We can't afford to wait for anyone to tell us what to do. We make the rules now. We decide what success looks like. The room erupted into applause, the energy palpable. For the first time since she had stepped into this role, Casey felt like she truly belonged. She wasn't just the outsider anymore. She wasn't just the woman who had bought her way into a business. She was the woman leading it, shaping its future, and pulling her team with her every step of the way. That night, as Casey sat alone in her office once again, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She was no longer the woman people whispered about. She was no longer the gold digger or the ex-wife who had somehow landed herself in the business world. She had proven that she could build something of her own, something that didn't depend on anyone else's opinion of her. She wasn't done. She wasn't anywhere near done. But tonight, she allowed herself to savor the victory. The client, the deal, the company. All of it had come together because of her determination, her drive, and her willingness to bet on herself when no one else would. She picked up her phone again and sent a message to Jeremy. "We did it, baby. "We're just getting started." He replied almost immediately, "I knew you would. Proud of you, Mom." And for the first time in a long time, Casey allowed herself to believe that she had done more than just succeed. She had created something that was truly hers. The first few weeks after securing the deal felt like a whirlwind, with momentum building faster than Casey could track. She'd worked hard to make sure every step was calculated, every decision was deliberate, and every corner of the business was touched. She had been in the trenches, but now, as the startup began to take flight, the pressure was intensifying. The deal was done, but success wasn't guaranteed. Casey stood before her team at the end of another long day, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the report. It was all coming together in ways that made her pulse race with excitement. But there was still so much to do. "All right, team," Casey began, her voice steady but holding in. Her eyes scanned the room, looking at each person who had, until recently, viewed her with skepticism. There were no more whispers, no more sideways glances. They had all seen what she could do. But now, they were all counting on her to lead them through the final stretch. "You know what we need to do. We've set the standard high, and we're not backing down. I've seen all of you put in the work. Now let's show them what we can do when we work as a team." Her words were sharp, piercing through the room with the quiet force she'd cultivated. It wasn't about grand gestures anymore. It was about building something with intention, with discipline, and with focus. But Casey knew the next steps would be the hardest. The company's future depended on these next few months. The following morning, as Casey sat at her desk, looking over the reports, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen. It was an email from her lawyer, confirming that the paperwork for another round of investments was ready for her to sign. Her eyes narrowed as she read the figures. This wasn't just any round of funding. It was a significant boost to the company's financial backing, enough to give them the kind of leverage they needed to expand faster. The problem was, the terms weren't exactly what she'd hoped for. The investors wanted more control, more influence over the direction of the company than she had initially agreed to. It was a trade-off, she knew that, but it was a dangerous one. Too much control ceded could put the company at risk of being pulled in directions she didn't want to go. She had fought too hard to get here. The decision wasn't an easy one. The money was tempting, but so was the control she'd fought for. She couldn't afford to let others take over now, not when she was just beginning to find her footing. Her fingers hovered over the phone screen. She wasn't afraid of saying no. She wasn't afraid of taking risks. But this was a new kind of challenge. One that demanded not just the will to succeed but the wisdom to know when to hold her ground. That afternoon, she found herself at a meeting with Ryan and Julia, discussing the financials of the company. Ryan was the first to break the silence, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "So, I've been thinking about the investors you spoke with. They're offering us a pretty good deal. It'll give us the capital we need to push forward. You know, the kind of growth we're aiming for. This could be exactly what we need." Casey's brow furrowed. "I don't know. They're asking for more control than we agreed to. They want a bigger say in the direction of the company, and I'm not sure we're ready to give that up yet." Julia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I get it, but we can't keep doing everything on our own. We need the money, and they're offering a fair amount. We're getting to the point where we need more support." Casey shook her head, her fingers tapping the table lightly. "It's not just about the money, Julia. It's about maintaining our vision. I didn't take this company to lose control of it. We can find other ways to raise funds, without giving them a seat at the table." Ryan gave her a look of concern. "We're getting close to the edge, Casey. If we don't act fast, we could lose the momentum we've built. We have to think about the long-term goals here." Casey sat back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "I'm thinking about the long-term goals. I'm not going to let anyone dictate the future of this company but us." She paused for a moment, then added quietly, "I didn't get here by letting people call the shots, and I'm not about to start now." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. She knew Ryan and Julia were worried, but she had to trust herself. She had to trust that she was making the right decision. There was no room for doubt now. "I'll turn down the offer," she said, her voice steady. "But I'll keep looking for other options. We'll find a way to make this work without compromising our vision." Ryan didn't argue. He simply nodded, but she could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Julia, too, was quiet, her gaze fixed on the table. But Casey wasn't worried about their doubt. She had made her decision, and as the room grew quieter, she knew it was the right one. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, decisions, and moments of quiet triumph. The client who had signed on earlier in the month was thrilled with the progress they'd made. Sales were up. The team was beginning to gel, their once fractured collaboration now starting to feel more cohesive. Casey had made tough calls, firing employees who weren't pulling their weight, restructuring teams, and making decisions that stung, but were necessary for the long-term survival of the company. But there was still so much to be done. One evening, as she sat at her desk, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from an unknown number. She opened it and read the words carefully. "I need to speak with you. It's about your startup." Her pulse quickened. She didn't recognize the number, but the tone of the message left no room for hesitation. She hit the call button, her fingers shaking slightly. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it took her a moment to place it. "Casey," the voice said. "It's Ethan." Her heart skipped a beat. Ethan, her ex-husband. What was he doing calling her now? "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though she could feel the tension in her chest. "I've been keeping an eye on your startup," Ethan said, his voice casual. "I have to admit, I didn't think you'd make it this far, but here you are. I'm impressed." Casey's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Ethan?" He chuckled, and for a moment, she could hear the arrogance in his voice. "I've got a deal on the table that I think you should consider. It's a buyout offer. I think it might be time for you to sell. You've done well, but now it's time to move on." Casey's heart raced, and for a moment, she had to steady herself. "Sell?" she said, a cold edge creeping into her voice. "You think I'm going to sell now after everything I've built? After everything I've fought for?" Ethan's tone was almost patronizing. "Come on, Casey. You know this industry better than anyone. You can make a good deal and it'll set you up for life. You've worked hard, but there's no shame in cashing out." Casey's anger flared. "I'm not selling. I'm not walking away from this. This is mine. I'm not going to give it up just because you think I should." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Ethan spoke again. "All right, but don't say I didn't warn you. You'll need all the help you can get if you want to survive." She didn't respond. Instead, she ended the call, her heart still pounding in her chest. For a moment, she sat there, staring at her phone, the words echoing in her mind. "You'll need all the help you can get." But she didn't need help. She needed belief in herself, in her vision, and she would show everyone that she wasn't done yet. The conference room had cleared out, the buzz of conversations and hurried footsteps fading away as Casey stood by the large window in her office. Austin's skyline stretched out before her, endless and alive with possibility. It had been a long, exhausting day, filled with negotiations and presentations, but it was a small victory in itself. The team was more unified than ever, and the company was gaining recognition. The weight of it all, her company, her responsibility, still felt heavy, but Casey was getting used to it. She wasn't afraid of the pressure anymore. She welcomed it. Her phone buzzed on the desk, and she picked it up, seeing her ex-husband's name flash across the screen. Ethan. Her stomach twisted, but she couldn't afford to ignore him now. Not after everything he had said and done. Not after his smug condescension. His relentless undermining of her every decision. She answered. "Casey." His voice came through, clipped and calculated. "I was thinking about our last conversation, and I think we should talk. It's been a while, you know? Just the two of us." Her pulse quickened, but she masked the emotion behind a steady breath. "Talk about what, Ethan?" He let out a low chuckle, the kind that made her skin crawl. "You've made it further than I ever thought possible. I'll give you that. But, Casey, you're still trying to play in a game that's way above your head. We need to talk about your next move. I have a proposal for you. Let's meet. A quiet dinner. Nothing too serious. Casey hesitated, her thoughts spinning. The last time they'd met face to face, he had thrown words at her like daggers. The same sharp, dismissive tone that still haunted her years after their divorce. The same man who had called her a gold digger. He hadn't changed. He still saw her as nothing more than an accessory to his success. A woman who had spent years depending on him. And yet, there was something in his voice now. Something different. Something that made her want to understand what he was really after. You want me to meet you for dinner? She asked, her voice tight with caution. Let's keep it professional, Casey, he said. No hard feelings, just business. I'm offering you a chance to take this company to the next level. Consider it a peace offering. The invitation was almost too tempting, but there was a part of her that knew she couldn't let him get too close again. Not after everything. She wasn't foolish enough to believe for a second that his motivations were pure, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that his business connections could be valuable. She made up her mind. She would meet him, but on her terms. She wasn't about to let him think he still had the power to manipulate her. Fine, she said, but on one condition. I'll meet you, but I'm not doing this for your approval, Ethan. I'm doing this to see if your proposal is worth my time. I wouldn't expect anything less, he replied smoothly. I'll send the details. The evening of the dinner arrived. Casey stepped out of her apartment, her heels clicking against the sidewalk as she made her way to the restaurant where they had agreed to meet. It was an upscale, quiet place, a far cry from the cheap diners and fast food joints she used to frequent in her younger days. The kind of place where power and wealth mingled, where deals were made over carefully crafted meals and vintage wine. When she arrived, she was immediately led to a private corner booth, far from prying eyes. Ethan was already seated, his posture relaxed, his eyes scanning the menu as though he wasn't about to have a life-altering conversation with the woman he had once deemed incapable of achieving anything on her own. He looked up when she arrived, and for a moment, she could see something like genuine surprise in his eyes. She had changed. She wasn't the same woman he had discarded years ago. She had shed that skin, and the transformation was more than just physical. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke. It was clear she wasn't here to beg for anything. Casey, he said, standing up, his voice laced with a hint of disbelief. You look different, in a good way. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she sat across from him, her posture open but confident. The last thing she wanted was to give him the satisfaction of thinking he'd gotten under her skin. Cut to the chase, Ethan. What do you want? He smiled, a cold, controlled smile. I'm not here to insult you, Casey. I've been watching your startup closely. You've made some impressive strides, but I think you're missing something. The right connections. The right people in your corner. Casey raised an eyebrow. And you're offering those right people? He leaned in slightly, his voice low. You're smart, Casey. You've done well so far. But now you're starting to play with the big boys. You need influence. You need to expand your reach. I can help you with that. She didn't let herself flinch. And what's your angle in all of this? Let's just say, he said with a sly grin, I've learned a thing or two about making successful ventures. I've got people who can help you grow. They can provide the kind of backing you need to take this startup to the next level. Casey was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Ethan had always been good at selling himself, at making people believe that he held the key to their success. But this time, she wasn't buying it, not without knowing exactly what the price was. And what do you want in return? She asked, her voice flat, not giving anything away. Ethan took a sip of his wine, eyes never leaving hers. A seat at the table, not just as a business partner, but as someone who can guide your decisions. You'll have the final say, of course, but you'll need guidance. You'll need someone who knows how to navigate these waters. Someone who can help you when you hit a wall. Casey sat back in her chair, carefully considering his words. She could feel the old, familiar anger rising in her chest. The same feeling that had swelled when he had called her a gold digger. The same anger that had fueled her drive to prove him wrong. But now she wasn't angry. She was calculating. "You're still trying to control everything, aren't you, Ethan?" she said, her voice cool. "You don't see this as a partnership. You see it as a way for you to take credit for my success. I've been there, done that." Ethan's face darkened for a moment, but his smile never wavered. "You'll learn that in this business, Casey. You can't do it alone. You may have built something from scratch, but now it's time to let the experts take over." Casey's hand tightened around her wine glass, but she kept her face neutral. She wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing how much his words had stung. "I don't need your expertise," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What I need is respect. I've earned my place here, and I'll build this company on my terms, not yours." The silence stretched between them for a long moment before Ethan leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you, Casey. It's a tough world out there. You'll need help sooner or later." Casey didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had heard everything she needed to hear. The dinner ended quietly, without any of the drama or confrontation Casey had anticipated. Ethan had said his piece, and she had made her position clear. As she walked out of the restaurant, her thoughts were a blur. She could still hear his voice, see the way he had leaned in, trying to sell her on the idea that she couldn't succeed without him. It wasn't the first time he'd tried to manipulate her, but it would be the last. As she stepped into the night air, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, Casey realized something. She didn't need his help. She had never needed it. She had built this company on her own, and she would continue to do so. She wasn't just an ex-wife. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was a woman who had found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. The weight of the decision had settled into Casey's bones, but her resolve remained unshaken. Ethan had tried to pull her back into his orbit, offering a hand, but his grip was as insidious as ever, full of expectations, full of strings. And for a moment, standing in the cool breeze of the city night, she had been tempted to let him help, to lean on him as she had in the past. But the anger, the pride, the knowing that she had built this from the ground up, it was all too much to ignore. So she had said no. And now the aftermath was settling in. The office was quiet when she arrived the next morning. There was an odd peace in the air, a stillness that made her feel like everything was about to shift, like something big was on the horizon. She was alone for a moment, staring out the window of her office as she sipped the coffee that had become a lifeline over the past few weeks. It had been a long night, sorting through the contracts, finalizing the terms with the new client, and battling against that voice in her head that had spent years telling her she wasn't good enough. Casey had heard that voice for too long. The voice that said she didn't belong here, that she wasn't cut out for this world of high-stakes business. But now it was quieter. It was barely a whisper, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Ryan knocked before entering, his face filled with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying a nervous undertone. He always had that air of uncertainty about him when it came to delivering news, but Casey had learned to read it by now. He was afraid to share bad news, no matter how small it might seem. "What's up?" she asked, not looking up from the paperwork she was sorting through. "We got an offer. A good one," he said, his voice strained. "From the same investors who were interested in us before." Casey set the papers down and turned to face him. The air around her suddenly felt thick with tension. Investors. The same investors who had wanted to buy in but wanted more control. She had rejected them, but now they were back, knocking at the door. She hadn't expected this so soon, and it left her wondering how much they truly wanted a seat at the table. "How good of an offer?" she asked, her voice neutral but with a thread of caution running through it. Ryan hesitated. "They've upped their bid. They're offering more money this time, way more, and with less control demanded. They're willing to let you keep your leadership role, but they want to see progress by the end of the quarter. It's a solid deal." Casey considered the offer, weighing the possibilities. It was tempting, very tempting. The money they were offering would allow the company to grow exponentially, to enter markets she had only dreamed of. She could expand, hire more people, push the boundaries of what she had built. But there was a catch. The pressure, the expectations that came with the money, the demand for results. It was like a constant ticking clock hanging over her head. "You know what this means," she said slowly, her fingers tapping the edge of the desk. "We'd be under their thumb. Even if they say they're giving us control, there will always be someone else calling the shots, always someone with a say in our direction." Ryan didn't argue, but his eyes told her everything. He knew it too. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, walking further into the room and sitting down across from her. "We've been struggling with cash flow. This could be the opportunity we've been waiting for, Casey. You'd be able to grow the business without worrying about funding." Casey leaned back in her chair, her gaze focused on the street below. Her thoughts were a blur, but they were beginning to coalesce into something more concrete. She could feel the weight of the decision. And just as she had learned from the very beginning of this journey, this was not a decision that could be made lightly. The money was tempting, but it would come with strings. The control she had fought so hard for, the very thing she had built, would be compromised. A few days later, after another long night spent weighing the pros and cons of the offer, Casey found herself pacing in her office. She had made up her mind. It wasn't just about the money. It had never been about the money. Casey had built this company from the ground up. She had, following week that she had a meeting scheduled with the investors, a face-to-face where they would try to sway her decision. She had agreed to it, but in the back of her mind, she knew what she would say. This wasn't the deal she needed. When she walked into the sleek conference room, the contrast between her simple, purposeful attire and their polished suits was striking. The investors, 3 men and 1 woman, sat around the table, all looking at her with varying degrees of expectation. The head of the group, a tall man with graying hair, stood when she entered. "Ms. Sinclair," he greeted her, offering his hand. "We're glad you could make it. I'm sure you've had some time to consider our offer." Casey shook his hand, her grip firm. "Yes, I've considered it, and I appreciate the increased offer, but it's not the right fit for us." The room went still. The investors exchanged looks, their expressions shifting from polite interest to something else, something closer to confusion. "I'm not interested in giving up the control we've fought so hard to maintain," she continued. "You've made your offer, but it comes with too many conditions. We're on the verge of something big, and I need to know that if we go forward, it's on our terms." There was a brief pause before the man spoke again, his voice quieter now. "But, Ms. Sinclair, we have the resources you need to grow. This could be the opportunity you've been waiting for. Why turn it down?" "I've never needed anyone to give me anything," she said firmly, the words coming easily now. "We've built this from the ground up. If we keep pushing, keep working, we can achieve the same results without losing what makes this ours. And that's non-negotiable." The investors were silent for a moment, their eyes on her. She could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken challenge in their gaze. But she didn't flinch. She held her ground, knowing she was doing the right thing. Finally, one of the other investors, a woman with short blonde hair and a sharp gaze, spoke up. "We respect your decision, Ms. Sinclair. We can't say we agree, but we understand. We'll move forward with other opportunities." Casey nodded, standing up. "Thank you for your time. I appreciate your offer, but I'm not going to let anyone take control of what we've built." As she walked out of the building, a sense of relief washed over her. She had made the right choice. For the first time in a long time, she felt like the weight of the world wasn't pressing down on her. She wasn't carrying it alone anymore. She was carrying it with her team, with the people who believed in her. And that was enough. The world outside the glass doors seemed brighter, more promising. She could feel the future unfolding before her, her dreams turning into reality, one small step at a time. Casey's phone buzzed again. It was from Jeremy. "Hey Mom, just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. I knew you'd make the right call." Casey smiled, her fingers typing the response before she even thought about it. "Thanks, baby. I made the right call. We're just getting started." And for the first time in years, she truly believed it. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Casey's decision to turn down the investors had stirred up more than just her own sense of relief. It had created ripples across the business world, and people were starting to take notice. The startup was thriving, its newfound direction starting to yield results. She could feel it in the air as she entered the office each morning. The energy was different. The company was moving forward, faster than ever. And for the first time since she had walked through the door as an outsider, it felt like her company. She had fought for this. She had earned it. But success had a way of drawing out the unexpected. Not everyone was happy with her decisions. Not everyone saw the vision the way she did. Casey sat at her desk, looking at the latest reports, when her phone buzzed. It was an email from a familiar name, one she hadn't heard in weeks, Ethan Sinclair. She hesitated, but then opened it. "Casey, I've been thinking, it's impressive what you've done with the startup. I'll give you that. But the truth is, you've only gotten this far because you had money. Without it, without the backing, you'd be nothing. You've had lucky breaks, but luck runs out. It always does. You've made some great moves, but the real test is still ahead of you. I'm giving you one last opportunity to work with me before you fail. Let's talk." The words were a jab, a subtle dig wrapped in faux compliments. She could almost hear his voice in her head, the same condescending tone, the same dismissive attitude, the same Ethan who had called her a gold digger years ago. A part of her wanted to slam the phone down, wanted to ignore the words altogether. But there was another part, an older, wiser part of her that understood something more important. Ethan's offer wasn't about saving her. It was about control. He was still trying to keep her in his orbit, still trying to dictate how far she could go. But she wasn't his to control anymore. The next day, Casey called a meeting with her top team members, Ryan, Julia, and Mark. They'd been her core group from the beginning, and she knew they were ready to hear about the next steps. They were all in just as much as she was, and she couldn't afford to lose any of them now. "I just got an email from Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "He wants to meet. He thinks I've gotten lucky, that I've only made it this far because of my money. He's offering to help me again." Ryan raised an eyebrow, a look of surprise on his face. "Help? I thought you were done with him." "I am," Casey replied, her tone firm, "but we need to understand what he's really after. He's not offering help. He's offering control. He thinks he can still pull the strings. I'm not going to let that happen." Julia leaned forward. "So, what's the plan?" Casey's eyes narrowed as she met her team's gaze. "We're going to show him just how wrong he is. He thinks I've gotten lucky. We're going to prove to him that luck has nothing to do with this. This is about grit. This is about vision. This is about us. I'm not backing down, and I'm not going to let him think he still has the power to call the shots." Mark, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I'm with you, Casey. Let's show him what we're made of. We'll build this without him, and then we'll see who gets the last laugh." Casey smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell within her. Her team wasn't just on board, they were invested, too. They weren't just supporting her, they were committed to the same goal. And that, she realized, was more valuable than anything Ethan could offer. The next week, Casey sat across from Ethan in a high-end restaurant, the same place they had met years ago when they were still married. The table was set with fine china, the wine glasses gleaming under the soft light. It was the kind of place where deals were made over meals, where promises were whispered and business was done under the guise of civility. Ethan had arrived early, of course. He was already seated, looking as confident as ever in his tailored suit, his hands folded neatly in front of him. When Casey arrived, he stood, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Casey, it's good to see you. I've been keeping track of your progress. I'll admit, I'm impressed." Casey took her seat, looking him in the eye. "Impressed? I thought you didn't believe in my ability to succeed on my own." Ethan's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "You've done well, I'll give you that. But we both know the real reason for your success. It's the money. You had the capital to make it happen. But that kind of luck doesn't last forever. Casey remained silent for a moment, letting his words linger. She wasn't going to get baited into an argument. Not today. "You're wrong, Ethan," she said finally, her voice steady. "I didn't succeed because of money. I succeeded because of hard work. I succeeded because I refused to give up, even when people like you told me I couldn't make it. I didn't rely on luck, and I'm not going to start now." Ethan's gaze darkened, and for a moment, Casey could see the flicker of something. Resentment, perhaps, behind his eyes. "You've made your choice, then. Fine. But don't come crawling back when things fall apart. You'll need more than just grit to survive in this world." Casey leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "I'm not crawling back, Ethan. Not to you, not to anyone. I'm building this on my own terms. You'll see that soon enough." He didn't respond, but the tension in the air was palpable. It was a standoff, a silent battle of wills. He was trying to exert his power over her, trying to remind her of the past. But Casey wasn't the same woman she had been when they were married. She had nothing to prove to him anymore. A few days later, the final blow came. Casey received a call from one of the top industry analysts who had been watching her company's progress. He was blunt, but his words were full of respect. "I've been following your rise, Casey, and I've got to say, it's impressive. You've proven the doubters wrong. Your company is on the radar now, and I think it's time to bring your vision to a bigger stage." He went on to explain that there was an opportunity to take the company public, to list on the stock exchange. It was the kind of move that would catapult the startup into the big leagues, making it a player in the world of high-end tech companies. For a moment, Casey was silent, her thoughts racing. This was the kind of moment she had dreamed of. An opportunity to prove once and for all that she had built this without anyone's help, without anyone pulling the strings. When she hung up the phone, she felt a rush of excitement, but also a sense of quiet satisfaction. Ethan had underestimated her. He thought she was just a woman with money, someone who had nothing more to offer than a checkbook. But now, she had proven him wrong, not just in business but in life. She wasn't just some gold digger. She was the architect of her own success, and she had finally gotten the last laugh. The morning light was soft as it filtered through the blinds of Casey's office. For the first time in weeks, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had spent so long running on autopilot, constantly thinking about the next challenge, the next obstacle to overcome. But today, as she sipped her coffee and looked out over the city, she could feel the weight of everything she had accomplished. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. There was still so much to do, so much to build. But this moment, this stillness was hers. For once, she wasn't looking ahead in fear. She was standing firm in the present, knowing that she had earned every step of the journey. The door to her office creaked open, and Ryan stepped in. His usual nervous energy was gone, replaced with a new sense of calm. "Morning, Casey," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I've got some good news. The new round of investments has come through. It's a done deal." Casey's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her composure. "That's great, but we still need to focus on making sure we don't lose sight of the long-term vision." "I know," Ryan said, nodding. "But with this funding, we're going to be able to scale the business in ways we couldn't have imagined just a few months ago. The possibilities are endless." Casey took a deep breath. She had always been cautious when it came to big decisions, especially when it came to money. But the weight of this opportunity felt different. This wasn't just a step forward. This was a leap into a new world. One where she would no longer be overlooked, no longer be second-guessed. She was finally on the path to something she had only dreamed of, something that would make everything she had worked for worth it. "Let's do it," she said, her voice firm. "Let's show the world exactly who we are." A few weeks later, the press release went live. Casey sat at her desk, watching the reactions pour in from every corner of the business world. The headlines were full of praise for the startup's success, for its visionary leadership, and for the woman behind it all. Casey Sinclair, the woman who defied the odds. How a single woman built a tech empire from scratch. The articles were glowing, and for a brief moment, Casey allowed herself to bask in the recognition. But then, as quickly as it came, the moment passed. She had learned a long time ago that accolades were fleeting. It wasn't about the applause. It was about the work. She turned her attention to the next step, knowing there was always something more to be done. The company was growing, expanding, and with it, so was her responsibility. It was late one evening, as Casey sat in her office alone, that she received the call. Her phone rang, the name flashing across the screen, sending a chill down her spine. Ethan. She hadn't heard from him in months, and after their last conversation, she had expected him to fade into the background. But there he was, calling her again. Her finger hovered over the screen, and for a moment, she considered not answering. But curiosity got the better of her, and she swiped to pick up. Casey? Ethan's voice came through, smooth and confident, but tinged with something she couldn't quite place. I see things are going well for you. The company's doing better than I expected. Casey's grip on the phone tightened, but she remained calm. You expected me to fail, Ethan. But I'm still standing, just like I said I would. There was a long pause on the other end, and when Ethan spoke again, there was a hint of something else in his voice, something closer to respect. You've done well, Casey, he said, almost grudgingly. I was wrong about you. I'll admit that. You've built something, and I'm impressed. Casey wasn't sure what she expected from the conversation, but this was a surprise. She had spent years watching Ethan try to tear her down, watching him dismiss her abilities, her worth, and now here he was acknowledging her success. Thanks, she said, her voice level. But it's not your approval I needed, Ethan. It never was. The silence on the other end of the line was thick, as if Ethan was weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke again, this time with an almost bitter edge. I know, he said quietly, but if you ever want to talk, if you ever want to work together again, you know where to find me. Casey's lips curved into a faint smile, though he couldn't see it. I'm good, she replied, her tone firm. I don't need your help anymore. And with that, she hung up the phone, the finality of the decision settling deep within her. Ethan had tried to hold power over her, tried to make her feel small. But she had shown him that she could succeed on her own, without his influence, without his approval. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The company's growth was exponential. New clients were signing on, the team was expanding, and Casey was leading them with a steady hand. But it wasn't just the business that was changing. It was her too. She had found a new sense of self, a deeper confidence that came from knowing that she was enough. She had always thought that success would bring validation, that she would feel complete when others finally recognized her worth. But now, she understood the truth. Success wasn't about proving herself to anyone. It was about proving it to herself. One evening, as Casey prepared to leave the office for the night, she received another message. This one from Jeremy. Mom, I just saw your interview on TV. I'm so proud of you. I can't wait to see what happens next. A warmth spread through her chest as she read the message. For so long, she had carried the weight of her past, the baggage of being dismissed and underestimated. But now she had something to be proud of. She had created something that was entirely her own, something that was bigger than the label others had tried to place on her. She quickly typed a response. Thanks, baby. This is just the beginning. Casey sat back in her chair, her fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. She could feel the momentum of everything she had worked for building. The company, the success, the transformation, it was all coming together, and it wasn't because of anyone else. It was because of her. She had fought for this. She had earned it. And now the world was beginning to take notice. The months passed, and with each day, the company's success became more undeniable. Casey stood in front of the boardroom, addressing the new group of investors who had come on board. They were different from the ones who had tried to take control of the company earlier. These investors respected her vision, and for the first time she felt that she was in the right room with the right people. She wasn't being judged for her past. She was being celebrated for what she had achieved. As the meeting came to a close, Casey walked out of the boardroom, her steps firm and purposeful. She had built this, and she was just getting started. A few days later, as she sat at her desk, reviewing the latest reports, she received a call from Ryan. "We've got some more good news," he said, excitement in his voice. "The company's been listed as one of the top emerging tech firms in the country. The media's picking up on it, and we've got more offers than we can handle." Casey smiled, but there was no sense of triumph in her. She wasn't surprised. This was what she had been working toward. This was the result of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. "Well then," she said, leaning back in her chair, "it looks like we've made it. Let's make sure we stay on top." And as she looked out at the city, she knew that this was just the beginning. The best was yet to come.